Welcome back, ROM hackers. Today I'm here with another tutorial on some of the more complex and interesting things you can do with Gen 5 ROM hacking. Last time we went over the basics of making your own scripts and cutscenes, but this time we're going to be doing something completely different and taking a look at sprite editing. This is mainly going to be useful for changing a Pokemon's visual design in order to represent a type change. For example, if you want to make a Pokemon a fire type, you can give it red or orange in its color scheme to make it look more appropriate. But you can also use this to do things like make your own regional forms, or even add new Pokemon to the game entirely. Sprite editing opens up a lot of possibilities for what you can do with Pokemon, while still making them easy to understand for the player. For this tutorial, we're once again going to be using Frost Gen 5 ROM Editor. There's a link to it in the description. In addition to that, we'll also need an image editing software such as Sprite or Paint.net. And finally, we'll need a tool called G2D Mapper, which will also be in the description. To start things off, we're going to open up our ROM in the editor, and everything we're going to need is in this Pokemon editor right here. Once this opens up, we can search for the Pokemon we want to edit. For example, let's go with Sandslash. And then we're going to open up the Sprite editor. And this gives us all the tools we need for changing what the Pokemon looks like. On the top left here, you'll see the Pokemon sprite, just like you would in game. But if we go to this drop down, we can cycle between all the different sprites that the Pokemon uses. In Generation 5, the Pokemon use a sprite rigging system, which means that the sprite is broken up into separate parts that then move independently. So if we want to edit the Pokemon sprite, then we have to edit the rig as well. Down on the bottom here is the color palette, which determines what colors appear on the sprite. These are actually independent of each other, so for example, if I were to change the palette here, it'll actually change on the sprite, and that goes for all of the different front and back and the rig as well. Let's undo that for now. To the right, you'll see the Pokemon's icon, which is the smaller version of the sprite that you'll see in the player's party or PC. What's important to note about the icons is that they all use a set palette, which I'll get into more detail later, but just know that it's not the same as the palette you see down here. And finally, on the top right, you'll see all the different files that make up the Pokemon sprite. This includes things like the animations and the rig components. We're just not going to worry about these for now because they aren't necessary for basic sprite edits. There's a few different ways we can go about our sprite edits, but for now let's just start simple and look at the palette. I showed you earlier, but this can be done as simply as changing a value and then hitting apply. So let's just say in this case I want to make Sandslash's quills green. These are using RGB color values. So the first is the red. If I make this 255 and everything else 0, you'll see the color is red. Second one is green. And the last one is blue. And of course you can make all sorts of different colors by combining these. The colors here actually do lie a bit, because when they get imported into the game, they are compressed in order to fit a certain amount of bytes. Sometimes this can be weird, but when you hit apply, it'll take care of everything for you. Just something you have to keep in mind. Yeah, that was good. So now if we apply, we can see that this does carry over. Okay, hang on. We do have to change this as well. This is why you want to make sure you check all different sprites so you don't miss anything. Okay, and now if we save the ROM, you can go see it in game. And just like that, we have our green quilled, I guess it would be a grass type, Sandslash. I guess they do kind of look like leaves. But that just changes the color of the sprite. What if we want to change the sprite itself? Well, for that, we're going to have to export all of the necessary files and edit them in a image editing software. So to do that, let's save image. And what I recommend is you create a file system for this, because we're going to be exporting a lot of files, so you want to try and keep them separate. in this case, wherever I have my base directory, I make a sprites file and then // and we can save this here. And then we're going to do the same for the rig, back sprite, and the back rig. Also, some Pokemon have male and female variants. In those cases, you'll actually see them separated in this drop-down, and you'll have to edit them separately. Then once you've done that, we want to also save the palette. Right here. Opening this up in Sprite, you'll see that we have our sprite here, and we have to remember that we are using a set color palette. So to help with that, what we can do is switch the color mode to indexed, and this will make sure that we never go outside of the palette, because if we do, then it won't import properly. And in addition to that, I can also load the palette here, just make sure I have everything. From here, we can basically do whatever we want with the sprite. Like, for example, I can change the color of his claws. Oh, that changes his stomach too. So that's the thing with color palettes, is sometimes the colors are the same. But you have to try to keep them separate. Like that. I can also add new pixels wherever I want. Like this. The only thing to remember is that this background color here is going to be transparent when you put it in the game. Now with that in mind, I'm not going to be making a whole new / in this video. Instead, you may have noticed that I have this Alolan / here. We're going to use that instead. What I can do, in this case, I'm actually going to open this up in paint.net, since it's a bit easier to copy paste things. If I open up /'s front sprite, and then Alolan /'s, those, I can just paste this here, hit save. Now if I go back into the editor, first I have to import the palette from Alolan /, which is right here. And then from there I can import the image. I guess I could just use this, but for example here. Now it's Alolan /, but that does not go for the other sprites, so I'll have to do those as well. Now if you're wondering where I got this sprite, there is a Excel sheet, which I'll link in the description, which is a community compilation of Pokemon sprites from the later generations made in Gen 5's art style. As far as I know, they're free to use, so feel free to have a look and use them in your own ROM hacks if you want. So in order to get this new sprite working with the rig, which currently doesn't work, what you have to do is basically take the sprite and break it apart into the different rig parts. So for example, I can come over here, I can grab his arm, like this, copy that, paste it here-ish, and sometimes you'll have to fill in extra bits. But that can be pretty time consuming. So once again, I'm just going to be using these sprites that I've already made for my own ROM hack. Here. Import the front rig, back sprite, and the back rig. And one more thing, we want to import the shiny palette as well, so it doesn't look like this. These are all things you have to make yourself, which does take time and some trial and error. Now, if we look at it in game, you'll see we have our Alolan /. But the icon is normal /, so let's go ahead and fix that too. Now we have to take a look at this icon section over here. First things first, whatever Pokemon you're working with, you have to figure out what palette they use. Now, if you have decompressed the ARM 9, and you're specifically working with Black 2 or White 2, then you'll be able to see this automatically, and you'll also be able to set the palette. However, because I've not done that, it won't let me change it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about that. Just know that you need to figure out which palette to use, and you have to stick with that palette because you can't change it. So, now we see what palette we have, we can save the icon. And then we can also save the palette. We're going to need that as well. If I open up the palette in Sprite, you'll see that there's actually two stacked on top of each other. And what I can actually do is import as sprite sheet 32 by 32. And what I see is this is actually the animation that plays with two different frames. But let's go ahead and undo that. Process here is going to be the same as editing the sprite. Let's load the palette that we want to use, which is this one. And then we can change it with whatever colors we have available. Once again, I'm just going to be importing the Alolan Sand Slash that I've already made. Actually, the icon that I'm using for Alolan Sand Slash is made with palette 0. So if I try to import it now, you'll see it doesn't really work properly. I can actually get around that by switching to palette 0, importing it, but then it'll still use icon palette 2, which looks a bit different. If I wanted to, I could go in and change all the colors and whatnot, make it look right, but I'm not going to worry about that too much. Once I've imported that, you can see it looks like the new Alolan Sand Slash, except the colors are wrong. Again, that's fine. It just needs some work to change them. So now let's try something a bit more extreme, such as, let's say I want Nidoking's tail to be really long. Well, if we look at the rig, then that actually doesn't work too well because the tail only exists in this defined space, and if we were to extend it, it would go into all these other sprites and whatnot, which is no good. So that is where the tool G2D Mapper comes in, and we need to extract this front rig cells file. So let's take a look at that real quick. If I open up this tool, what I want to do is drag in the rig sprite and the rig cells. And what you'll see is this is how all of the body parts are divided. Specifically, since we're interested in the tail here, we'll see that if we wanted to make it longer, then the box that contains the tail is way too small. So in order to fix this, we have to do a few different things. First, we want to relocate the tail so it can be somewhere with a bit more space. Such as down here looks alright. So let's take this box and we're going to move it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right. Now, if we open up the file in Sprite, we do the same with the actual tail here. I can drop it down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 8 down? Yeah. Actually, I'm going to go up 1, so it's not clipping off the bottom. And going back here, let's also move that up 1. And also, because we can't have transparency, let's fill that in. Now, if I drag both the files back into here, or actually just the sprite file, the tail is down here now. And then from there, we need to expand this box. To do this, we can simply drag it. And when we're doing this, we have to remember that the top left is where the sprite is anchored. So if you look at the bottom, you can see how the sprite is positioned. If I were to drag this up and left, then the tail actually moves. And we don't want that. But what we can do is we can go up and left. And then for each tile, we expanded it up and left. Let's go over to these sprite positions and change those by 8. So now it's back in the same place it was originally. And then from there, we can expand it down and right all we want. Let's actually expand it one more up as well. Go do this, and then change this to 47. And then, so that I'm not running into these sprites here, I also want to move the sprite a bit here. We can go like, let's say, 5 pixels, 6 pixels right, 4 pixels down. And then if I do this, then I also have to change it here. So change this to 18, and this one to, I believe it was 51. And then drag this over, oh, save it first. And then drag this back here. And now, once again, it's back in the same place, which is what we want. And then from there, we can finally expand the tail a bit. Again, not going to be too specific about like how it looks. I just want to prove how it works. And now you can see it extends up like this. Now that we've done that, let's save as. Call this front rake cells 2. And now there's one more thing we need to do before we can import it. And that's because this tool actually has a bit of a bug, which if we don't fix this, then the sprite will sort of jump around between the static sprite and the moving sprite. Mainly during the evolution sequence as well as in the Pokédex, it'll look out of place. So to fix this, we'll actually need one more tool, which is going to be a hex data editor. Any one of them will work. So I've got 2 pulled up here. What I want to do is grab the front rake cells, drag it onto here, and then the second one, drag it here. And what you'll see is that this very top row of numbers is going to be different between the two. What we want to do is just copy the values from the left one over to the right one. Okay, and then we stop there. Then we can save that, close both of these. And now back in this editor, we want to replace this file with the one we just made. And then import the image we just edited, like that. And then we can go ahead and save the ROM. And with that, you can see we have our unusually long Nidoking tail. Once again, this won't affect the backside, so you have to do that separately, but it's the exact same process. So that'll get you through changing Pokemon that are already in the game. As I mentioned before, there's a lot more you can do as far as adding new Pokemon or more complex changes, but since this video is already getting pretty long, I think it's best to save those for later. So if this was helpful, be sure to leave a like, and I'll see you next time.